This video demonstrates the use of the CSS 3 Flexbox. This video concentrates on the layout of the page structure and a basic adaptation of the page contents for responsive behavior. This means that the web page and its contents should be usable and readable across all browsers and on a wide variety of devices. Prior to beginning, it is recommended that you open the 3 resources shown in your browser, each in a new tab. Each of these is also available via links on the web page where this video is found. The first 2 resources are references to better understand the Flexbox. The last resource will be used at the end of this demonstration to add vendor prefixes to the CSS code to work with a wide variety of devices and browsers. The need for these prefixes is discussed and explained in the second of the 3 previously mentioned resources. The beginning HTML and CSS files are available for download and use while following this tutorial. Links to download the files are available on the web page where this video is found. To follow along, you will need to open the files in a code editor. To test the results of the code changes as you progress through the video, you will need to upload the files to a remote server or open the files on your local machine in a web browser. Begin by looking at the HTML file. You will note the structural elements have no ID or class attributes. These structures do have ARIA landmark roles for usability, but that is all. This is intentional on my part. Too often, internet-based demonstrations rely on attaching an ID or class to an HTML element to style it. It is not necessary, and this video demonstrates this. As you look at the structures, header, nav, main, aside, and footer, you will note that each has an inner div. While not necessary, it is useful in many cases and will be used in this video. All other HTML markup is standard and ordinary. Please note on line 7 of the HTML file the presence of the viewport meta element, specifically required for responsive layout. Following the web development model, all CSS is external to the web page and is stored in a file named flex-layout.css. This style sheet is linked to the HTML file via a link element on line 6 in the head of the HTML file. Most of the selectors have already been placed in the CSS file. If you are unfamiliar with CSS selectors, refer to the w3.org website using the URL as shown. In the CSS file, note that the normalize.css file is being imported. To better understand the normalize CSS file, visit the site that is shown. The rule on line 20 changes the CSS box model from the default content box to the border box. This eliminates much of the math required to calculate element sizes when padding and borders are added. The body rule on line 32 is fairly normal and includes declarations to set the font to 16 pixels and reset it to 1em. These are equivalent sizes, just different measurement units. This video and the style sheet being used take a mobile-first approach. This means that the CSS is intended to apply to all appearances generally and to small mobile screens primarily. Prior to adding any additional CSS statements, you will find 2 media queries found beginning on lines 172 and 235. The first is for screens with widths between 701 and 1299 pixels. The second is for screens of 1300 pixels or larger. Within these media queries will be added CSS to change the appearance of the web page on these larger screens. The Flexbox model relies heavily on understanding the relationship between parent and child elements. The Guide to Flexbox resource, mentioned previously, demonstrates this with the left column being used with parent elements and the right column with child elements. You may wish to read through this resource prior to continuing, or pause the video and refer to the resource as needed. Let's begin by looking at the web page in a browser as it currently exists. As you can see, the page is usable but not appealing. Also, note that as the screen is made small, that horizontal scrolling is required because of the size of the image in the content of the page. The first change to the CSS to be made is to force image elements to adapt to the size changes. On line 51, you will add the max width property with a value of 100%. This allows images to grow to their full width or to the width of their parent, whichever is smaller. If we save and reload the web page, you will see that the image now reduces and horizontal scrolling is no longer necessary. Next, we will begin using the Flexbox. In this case, we will declare the body element's inner div as the Flex parent. All structures with ARIA role attributes are children to this div. On lines 71 and 72, you will add display : flex semicolon and flex -flow : column space no wrap semicolon respectively. The first line makes the div a Flex parent. The second line indicates that all children will be oriented along the y-axis vertically and should not wrap. Because of small screens having limited widths, this is the default behavior we want to maintain. Next, move to line 78 and add flex : 1 semicolon as a declaration as shown. This allows all elements of this type to grow and shrink to the available space. The 1 is proportional and can be used to indicate the amount of space an item occupies when shared with other elements. If all have 1, then all get an equal share. Now move to lines 85 and 86. Add display : flex semicolon and flex -align : row space no wrap to the rows respectively. The code on line 85 makes the inner div on the banner a Flex parent. Line 86 changes the default axes to horizontal and tells the children not to wrap if the space becomes smaller. On line 96, enter flex : 1 semicolon. As explained earlier, this allows the H1 in the header to fill the entire line. Note on line 91 that the logo is being hidden on small screens to preserve space. This will change as screens become larger. On lines 102 through 105, you will change the behavior of the main nav element of the page. These lines of code will remove all padding, ensure that it is full width, fix its position, and move it to the bottom of the window. This code puts the navigation close to the thumbs on a small screen device for ease of access. Add the code as shown in the video. Next, the unordered list in the navigation, lines 110 through 112, will be made a Flex parent and will control its children, the list item elements, to orient horizontally, not to wrap, and to align themselves to the left. Refer to the code on the screen. Moving to lines 119 and 120, each list item will itself be made a flex parent and will also be given an equal share of the space of its parent, the unordered list, which was styled on line 109. Finishing the styling on the navigation, on line 126, each anchor will be styled to fill the available space. This will allow the anchor to be clicked from anywhere inside of the list item. Now the fingertip, the typical cursor on small devices, will have more room to click the link. Save your work and let's test the page in the browser. At this point, the navigation should be at the bottom of the screen, laid out horizontally, and the anchors should each be about 20% of the width of the navigation bar. The borders on the anchors are so you can see them. They would be removed in an actual production situation. However, when the page is scrolled vertically, the footer is hidden behind the navigation bar. This needs to be fixed, and let's do that by returning to the style sheet. There are a variety of ways of making the content of the footer visible above the nav bar, but the means we are going to do so is by adding some padding to the bottom of it. Go to line 147 and add padding-bottom: 5M. Save the style sheet. On the video, you can see that I have returned to the browser and refreshed the page. Now, scrolling to the bottom, the footer is clearly visible above the navigation bar. But the contents of the footer need some work. Let's do that now. Move to lines 152 through 154 of the style sheet. In these lines, you will make the unordered list a flex parent, orient its children horizontally, and allow them to wrap if space becomes cramped, and begin by aligning on the left. The specific code is display::flex, flex-flow: row space wrap, and justify-content: flex start, with each on its own line and all ended by a semicolon. Next, the list items will be styled. On lines 160 and 161, the list items will be made a flex parent, and each of the list items will be told not to grow, but allowed to shrink and allowed to adjust its size to the default size. The code to accomplish all of this is display::parent and flex::0:1:auto, each statement its own line, and of course ended with a semicolon. The last change to the footer is to make the anchors fill the available space. On line 168, add flex::1. Note on lines 166 and 167, a line height and min width have been set. Save, and in the browser you will see the changes after a refresh. Things look better now. With the Flexbox now implemented for small screens, the content should be easily read and require no horizontal scrolling. Just what is wanted. But what about as the screen grows larger? That is why we have media queries, and that is where we will go next. Because of the cascading nature of CSS, much of the code that we have written will still apply even inside of the media query. We will now simply make changes to those elements that require it as needed to alter the page appearance. Moving to line 199, let's change the behavior of list items inside of the navigation. In this case, we will set flex::0:0:10%. This indicates that list items will have a default size of 10%, and they should not grow or shrink. Next, we will change the default behavior of the children of the body's inner div to orient themselves horizontally and allow wrapping, but to align themselves to the left by default. This code will be entered on lines 207 and 208 as flex-flow : row space wrap and justify-content : flex-start, respectively. Having changed the flex parent of all of the structural elements, we will now change their behavior. On line 213, add flex:1 space 100%, allowing these items to grow and shrink and have a default size of 100%. The last three changes to this media query is to make the aside and main elements sit side by side and ensure that the footer appears after them. On lines 218 and 219, set flex to 1 and order to 3, respectively. The first statement gives the aside one share of the line and tells the browser to render it as the third structural element on the page, after the header and nav. Then, on lines 224 and 225, set flex:5 and order: 4. The first statement gives the main element 5 shares of the line and tells the browser to render it as the fourth structural element on the page. These additions and those on the aside have divided the line where these two elements reside into a 6-column layout, with the aside getting 1 column, approximately 17%, and the main getting 5 columns, approximately 83% of the line. The final change to this media query is to ensure that the footer remains below the aside and main elements. Go to line 230 and add order: 5. Save the style sheet, and in the browser you should see something similar to what you see in the video. An interesting thing you can do is, if you want the main and aside to reverse locations, just swap their order values. Watch on the screen as I make these changes and then refresh the browser window. Pretty easy. The last thing we will do is add some final changes to the last media query for really large screens. The issue that is being solved here is when monitors have very high pixel counts, the text and layout can become so small or spread out that the content cannot be easily read. Our final media query is for screens that are greater than 1300 pixels. On lines 238 through 240, we will set some limits on the body element's inner div. Remember that it is the parent of all structures and thus all the content on the page. On line 238, add width:90 VW. The CSS measurement unit of VW is based on the width of the viewport, the browser window. So 90 VW is essentially 90% of the window, but only if it is larger than 1300 pixels. Next, on line 239, set margin 0 space auto. This sets the top and bottom margin to none and forces the inner div to be equal distances left and right from the window edge, centering the content on the screen. Finally, on line 240, the font size is changed to 2 VW. This makes the font grow as the window does, and thus should make all text readable. It has no effect on images. Save and refresh the browser. You can see as the screen changes, the CSS responds. We are almost done. As was mentioned at the beginning of this video, some devices and browsers require vendor prefixes to work correctly with Flexbox. The last resource can be used to automatically add this additional code for us. To use it, make sure this resource is open in a browser window. Then go to the Flex Layout CSS style sheet and select all of the code. Then copy it. Switch to the browser and paste the code into the left column as shown. The tool will add all of the prefixes and the finished code will appear in the frame on the right. Click the Select All button above the frame on the right, then copy. Return to your style sheet and paste. This should replace all of your code with the new. You may want to take a moment and review the code. In the new code, there is an abnormality that needs updated. The -webkit-box-ordinal-group properties value is off by 1. Find each occurrence of this in the media query. These should be found close to or on lines 280, 292, and 300. And change its value to match the other order values in each of these rules. Save your work and run the web page using the modified CSS. The result should be a web page that now flexes, expands, and collapses gracefully on a variety of devices. If possible, test on your own smartphone and tablet devices to ensure that it works. The Flexbox is very easy to implement, despite having to add many vendor prefixes. It also makes it easy to implement a grid based on proportions as well as move items around on a screen to achieve the layout you want. Be sure to check out the other resources shown on the web page where this video is found.